You are probably building your Commander decks backwards, and this may well be the root cause of many of the possible issues that you have with your decks. Well, really, you're probably not building them backwards, and that's the real problem. This video is all about starting with the end in mind, and I'm going to share 2 deck building concepts with you that have been some of the biggest light bulb moments that I've had in deck building in the entire time that I've played Magic, and I've played the game for about 30 years. And why should you listen to me? Well, I help many people with their decks, and based on their feedback, some of which I've put on screen, they think I'm pretty good at what I do. I think there's a pretty good chance that these 2 ideas will blow your mind, or at the very least will change how you think about deck building, so let's yap about them. And a big thank you to Void Monster for sponsoring this video, but more on them later. I build and increasingly review a lot of Magic decks, and without a doubt the thing that comes up time and time again that can make any Magic deck that comes across my desk better is focus. If you're one of the 25% of the people watching this that are regulars here and are already subscribers, then you have almost certainly heard me talk about the topic of focus before, like in my video about the 33 card deck method that I often use as part of my deck building process. Whilst focus has always been an underlying part of how I build good decks, a few months ago I had the first of these 2 light bulb moments. As I was going through the process of helping someone review their Commander deck, what had been general underlying ideas and thoughts bubbled up to the surface and crystallized into a very clear idea that I was able to articulate properly for what felt like the first time. Almost all of the decks that I was looking at definitely weren't bad, but they were either focused on doing the wrong things, or in the vast majority of cases, there was not a clear and/or focused vision of what the deck was trying to achieve. And importantly, no clear vision of what the desired in-game board state looked like, or how the deck would reliably win the game. And it's this lack of focus or vision that causes most of the problems. Effectively, these decks were being built with thought around the start of the game and even the middle, but often not nearly enough thought about the end. And the end matters because it affects both the start and the middle a whole lot. Anyone who has ever tried to cook something without a very clear goal of what type of dish it is you're trying to make, or how certain ingredients will affect the final product you'll be stuffing into your face, will know the pain of the all too disgusting mess that you probably ended up creating. Building a good deck is a lot like getting your hands dirty in the kitchen. There are tons of different ingredients that could go into your meal, but whether or not you end up with something delicious requires you to have a very clear idea of what it is that you want as an end product. And it's not just the ingredients that matter, but also the order that you cook them and how you cook them. Now, this game can be difficult and complicated, especially if you're newer to the game, so I'm going to try and make this process much easier for you. To begin with, before I review a deck, I give people a list of questions to answer. These questions really help me understand whether or not someone has a clear vision of what they're looking for or not before I start cooking. And whilst I'm very happy to help people make their decks better, I'd much rather that you're able to do it by yourself. And I think asking the right questions is most of the battle. The first question has 2 parts. Firstly, what bracket do you want to play this deck in? And secondly, what kind of experience do you want to have or create? Regardless of what you think of the Commander brackets and whether or not you use them, I think the way the bracket system is structured provides a really good basic foundation to understand roughly what kind of experience you're hoping to have. Experience really matters, and a good deck is only good if it fits the environment that it's played in. So a bracket should have a big impact on the cards that go into your deck, because not all cards fit all experiences, and this is especially true of the cards that we're hoping to use to win the game. When I am helping someone fix or upgrade their deck, this basically tells me how hard I should or can hit the accelerator in terms of power and cards or interactions that I add to the deck. I won't spend too much time here, but bracket 2 is the standard casual beers and board games kind of vibe. You definitely don't want your deck to be too oppressive or limit others from playing the game too much, because people want to be able to feel like they're making some kind of impact on the game. They are mostly here for fun. Bracket 3 is the most common bracket that comes across my desk because that's where most people go after they start upgrading their precons. It's a little bit more serious as people start flexing both their wallets and their play skills. You probably still want people feeling like they can play the game, but interaction and power levels increase, and completely shutting the game down around turns 5 to 7 is much more acceptable if that's your vibe. Bracket 4 is basically no holds barred and all-out fighting. It's typically where those who have played Magic for a long time will want to play because it offers faster games, more impactful decision making, and obviously the least restrictions on how one builds a deck. It's just kill or be killed. The bracket system also includes an expectation on what turn the game ends, which I think is very helpful. It's typically turn 9 or 10 in bracket 2, turn 7 in bracket 3, and around turn 4 in bracket 4. And the speed of these experiences are again reflective of the casual, semi-competitive, and all-out competitive relationship with a game of Magic, and depending on which bucket you hope your deck falls into, it'll have an effect on what kind of cards you can or should be adding to your deck. For example, we're not going to put a card like Static Orb in our bracket 2 deck, because it's going to create a complete standstill for 8 turns and an hour. I will, however, put it in my bracket 4 Zuludoc deck, where it may slow down some of my opponents by a turn or two, so that I actually have the chance to try to win the game on around turn 5, which is going to be about 15 minutes later. The impact this card has in these two different brackets is completely different, and often, playing a Static Orb in bracket 4 feels underpowered and a little bit weak, which is completely different to how it feels playing it in bracket 2. So again, the context of how and where we intend to play a deck really matters. But it doesn't matter only because of how it affects other people's experiences, it matters because it affects the end goal of what our deck is doing and everything that builds towards that point. If you're building a bracket 2 deck to play with your friends who are new to the game, you know it shouldn't win before turn 9 and you know it shouldn't be too oppressive. So you probably don't want to include that 2-card combo that could win on turn 5, and you probably also don't want to play a card like Grave Pact that could just completely shut down certain types of decks. Conversely, if you're looking to cook something up for bracket 4, you know you need to be able to win reliably by about turn 4 or 5. And in that case, this 2-card combo is perfect. But now Grave Pact is probably far too slow. And it would be far better suited to bracket 3, where it's going to have enough time in play to be effective between the time that you play it and when the game ends. The second question is again a pair of closely related questions. Firstly, how does your deck win, or how are you hoping to win the game? And secondly, what combinations of cards are the most important for you to be able to achieve that win? This is probably the most important question to ask, because I've realized that people often have very vague ideas of how they're hoping to win the game. They will typically have some good ideas that affect the early and mid parts of the game, but where it'll all fall down is how those things come together and how they convert those elements into a win. Or alternatively, they have some very good ideas about how they want to win the game, but it clashes with either how they plan to get there in the early to mid stages of the game, or the experience that they're hoping to have or create. And all of this put together is the first of the two major lightbulb moments. How you hope to win the game should affect every single card that you have in your deck, and how you're hoping to win ties to both the bracket that you're playing in and the experience that you're trying to create. Every card in your deck should in some way facilitate you getting closer to that desired endpoint, and this should have a big impact on the cards that we play in the early or mid game. This is why some decks want tons of card draw and others little. It's why some decks want tons of ramp, but others want none. Because the way the deck aims to win is influencing all the other parts of the deck. And the more cards in your deck that synergize with and propel you towards your win conditions, the better your deck will be. You know, speaking of lightbulb moments, this could be another for you if you like absolutely sick magic accessories. A massive thank you to Void Monster for sponsoring this video. Void Monster is a TCG accessories brand by magic artist Forrest ML. You know, the guy who made your favorite band Goblin Pirate, and they make incredibly cool stuff like this. They release a new drop every month, and this month it's the Green Collection. There's a playmat, a deck box, a card binder, and sleeves, and if you like it, orders close in a week on May 3rd at 12 PM PST, and there's a link in the description and pinned comment so you can go and check it out. If you like it, get it before it's gone, or be like me and miss their Void drop, which would have been absolutely perfect for your Zuludoc deck, and then live with eternal regret. Let's put these ideas into practice as I talk through some of the examples from both my own decks and a deck that I've reviewed to help highlight what I mean. And after that, I'll give you the second lightbulb moment that I had. Let's use my Meren deck as an example to talk about why it works well in bracket 3. This deck has gone through multiple iterations, but over time it's gotten stronger, moving from bracket 2 up to bracket 3. The way I want to win is by playing and recycling a Grey Merchant of Asphodel or Archik. I'll typically have to do that anywhere from 3 to 4 times to win the game, but to do this, that means I'll need a card like Archik, a sacrifice outlet to get it into the graveyard, and lastly ways to get it back. If I have Archik, something like an Umbral Collar Zealot, and Meren, that's likely 2 of my 3 to 4 needed Archik triggers. Then if I add a card like Twilight Diviner or Reanimate, now we're already looking at 3. And I'll obviously also need a bunch of creatures in my graveyard. This is both a game plan that's viable in bracket 3, but is also not going to happen on turn 4. Everything in the deck facilitates this win condition, from mana dorks to ramp me close to the needed mana, and that can help boost Meren's experience counters and counters creatures in my graveyard for Archik, to self-mill to fill my graveyard for Archik, to tutors to help me find Archik, or an explosive game piece like Twilight Diviner in the first place. I'll specifically call out some recent changes that I made when I reviewed it, because I felt like it was too weak and needed a little bit of work. I still had cards like Massacre Worm and Bane of Progress in the deck that were toolbox pieces when the deck was focused on being a slower, more grindy machine in bracket 2. These two cards were a lot of fun, but were just way too slow for bracket 3, and were almost always dead cards in my opening hand. They simply didn't help me towards my primary goal or win conditions much at all. They've since been cut for something like Sylvan Library or Life from the Loam, which are spells that are far better fitting into both bracket 3 and my current game plan. In contrast, I'll use an example from one of my mini deck reviews. One of my very base community wanted help with their Tom Bombadil Saga deck. The request was that they were hoping it could be a bracket 4 deck. What I put on screen was what I ended up building for them, which was definitely not a bracket 4 deck, but was instead bracket 3. And this deck will help to highlight both how starting with the end in mind and the brackets affect what we can and should add to our decks. My immediate feedback on Bombadil was that he is a really bad fit for bracket 4. He wants, and the person wanted, to fill the board with sagas and use them as a value engine. But this game plan is far too slow for bracket 4, where Bombadil alone is about 30% of the total mana we're going to have available across the game, and we simply don't have the turns available in the game to generate enough value from his ability. The best possible place for Tom Bombadil based on the desired outcomes was actually in bracket 2, because of the expensive nature of sagas, the cost of the commander, and the amount of time that we need to have him in play to generate enough value. At higher power levels and higher brackets, a deck needs to be explosive, and unfortunately one thing Tom Bombadil is not is explosive. There was also another concern for me. This person wanted to play Tom Bombadil because of how much they loved the Lord of the Rings and the characters, even calling out specific cards that they wanted to include. If there was any chance of making a Tom Bombadil deck viable in bracket 4 or even in bracket 3, we would lose the opportunity for whimsy and identity because of how many standard high-powered cards and win conditions we'd need to include to make the deck work. So even if we did manage to make the deck work in bracket 4, it would in no way conform to the vision this person had at the beginning. I ended up finding a middle ground in bracket 3 where Tom Bombadil was used as a value engine, with our sagas performing our card advantage and removal roles in our deck, but our win conditions were highly explosive plays, either winning with something like Coalition Victory, Bahamut's damage triggers, or making an infinite amount of big scary hasty terrors. Ultimately, there wasn't a good version of this Bombadil deck for bracket 4, at least certainly not one that was remotely capable of winning on turn 4 or 5, which is pretty much a requirement. Bracket 3 was doable, but not in the style of deck this person ultimately wanted. If they wanted the Tom Bombadil deck that they envisioned, it should be built for and played in bracket 2, and that has a big impact on how the deck would be built. Had none of this ever been taken into consideration, or had this person never spoken to me, they would quite likely have continued to try to build Tom Bombadil in bracket 4, and it would likely never have resulted in a good deck or a good experience for them. Now I promised you 2 lightbulb moments, and this time around, some simple math will hopefully completely change how you think about deck building. The main theme of this video is clearly all about starting with the end in mind, and then having a very clear vision for what your desired end game state is. Once we have that, the second lightbulb moment for me was in thinking about our finite resources, like cards or mana, across the entire game rather than turn by turn. Just a big old bucket of how many cards we'll likely draw and how much mana we will likely have in total by the end of the average game. Then take that, especially the total mana, and compare it to how much total mana you need to realize your winning game state. Simply take the mana values of all the cards that you need to play to win the game, then add them together and see whether or not that fits in with our estimation of how much mana we'll make across the game. It's either going to match up or it's not. Of course, there is some devil in the details here about the flow of our turns and our mana curve, but that's a later problem because right now we want to focus on the quick math. Coming back to one of our questions earlier about why brackets matter, if you know what bracket you're brewing your deck for, this will give us an estimated amount of turns that we then have available to us, which will inform how much mana most decks will have available to them in that bracket across the average game. For example, most bracket 2 games will end after turn 8. On average, assuming an early game ramp spell hitting our land drops, most people will probably have about 45 mana in total across the average bracket 2 game. In bracket 3, you can expect to have a total of around 35 mana, and in bracket 4, you can expect to get to about 15. Obviously, you can make more mana if the games go longer or if you play a whole bunch of ramp, but that's not something that we can really rely on in the general case. All this means that if your desired win cons and all the other necessary cards you will need to play, like ramp, draw, and removal, cost too much mana when compared to the expected amount of mana you're going to make in a game, then you have a problem. And if you have a problem, then for your deck to function well, one of these 3 things will need to happen. You'll either need more ramp to allow you to cast those spells, or you'll need to change your win conditions so they fit within your total mana budget, and failing both of those, you may need to change the bracket that you expect to play in, because your deck might be underpowered or too weak for the bracket that you're hoping to pilot it in. Alternatively, if your average win costs 6 mana with a 2-card combo and your deck is in bracket 3, then you may be overpowered for the level that you're playing at, and you could be better off trying to slow things down or fit into bracket 4. If we go back to my Merrin example, my average win requires Merrin, at least 4 dorks dying to give me experience triggers, a sacrifice outlet, then Grey Merchant, another black creature or 2 to give me some color pips, and a reanimation spell. This is obviously a whole heap of cards to assemble, and it takes about 25 mana, but I want to be playing all of those spells anyway because they all align with the main game plan of my deck, which is right where I want to be in bracket 3. If I was playing a control deck where my win cons aren't as synergistic with my deck, the actual win cons would need to be built up of less cards and cost less mana. If we then compare this to my Zhulodok deck that I play in bracket 4, I can draw my whole library with a combination of 3 spells that cost a total of 7 mana. Or if I play my Commander, can gain massive amounts of value by casting spells like Mirror Enforcer or Metalwork Colossus for 0 mana and cascading a whole bunch. Many of the cards I cascade into will allow me to make infinite mana, and then I can cast any number of big game-winning spells. This would be far too strong for bracket 3, but is just right, or perhaps even a little bit underpowered, for bracket 4. This early end to a bracket 4 game, and the fact that most decks will accumulate about 15 mana across the game, is why infinite combos and combos in general are so prevalent at higher power levels. Last but not least, I haven't talked much about bracket 2, so let's return to the OG of my channel in Sauron. To win the game with this deck, I likely want a big orc army in play that I want to cast a Chandra's Ignition on, or I want to flashback an Increasing Vengeance on a Soul's Fire. The total mana cost for either of these lines is actually pretty low at about 10 or 13 mana. At face value, that could seem way too strong for bracket 2, but the reality is that Sauron won't come out before turn 5, and typically, I'll amass about 5 to 6 counters on my orc army per turn cycle. To get an orc army big enough to deal 40 damage to the entire table, I need about 7 turn cycles. Or if I use one of my spell copiers on my Chandra's Ignition, perhaps I can try to win after about 4 turns, which is about turn 9 or 10, which is just perfect for bracket 2. With this in mind, I can fill my deck with all kinds of fun or powerful cards, because unless they meaningfully speed up that process, it's unlikely that my deck will be too strong and I have freedom to cook without the worry of overpowering my opponents, which in bracket 2 is a real concern. Unlike with my Merrin or Zhulodok decks, where I'm trying to power them up as much as I can. To wrap this up, I want to drive home the point that starting with the end in mind when you're cooking up a deck is basically a deck building cheat code. And if you simply think about what bracket you want to play in, with all the knock-on effects that has, because there are knock-on effects, and you make sure all your cards you need to win within the game will fit within the total expected mana that you're likely to have, you're going to make sure that your deck does what you want almost every single time. I hope you found this useful, and if you have thoughts to add to this or you have questions, yap at me in the comments. Or come yap at me live when I stream on Saturday at 8 PM Eastern Time, and there's a link to that down in the description. If you want to support what I do, smash up the like button or head over to my Patreon, and a big thank you to everyone that supports me over there. If you want some personal tailored help, you can find that over on Ko-fi, all of which you can find the link to down below the like button. If you enjoyed this, go and check out one of these videos, especially the 33 card deck video, and don't forget to check out Void Monster and the Green Collection. As always, thank you for being here.